I have delivered the answering more times than I have counted, and in all those years I never once saw a proxy live. I say this so you understand what I am, and why my hands were steady that morning above Isk, and why they have not been steady since. I am Aharu Sen, third of my line to carry the Reckoner's mark, and on the day humanity was first seen, I stood on the ledger deck of the immaculate precedent with the sentence already written. The writing is my office. When two peoples wound one another and cannot mend the wound between them, they come to us, the meridian assize, and we open the ledger and we find the truth of the debt, and then we set the truth against the hull of the guilty, and we let physics do what argument cannot. This is the answering. It is older than any nation now flying. It is the reason the lanes are quiet and the small worlds sleep unafraid, and I believed in it the way you believe in the floor beneath your feet, not as a thing you have examined, but as a thing that has simply always held. The wind of Isk had crossed a boundary they should not have crossed. It was not a large crime. They were a small people, soft-shelled and slow, who lived in the tide flats of a single blue world and had never in their history built a weapon that could reach past their own moon. But a boundary is a boundary, and the assize does not weigh crimes by the size of the criminal. That is the whole of our authority, that the ledger does not flatter the strong or pity the weak. A line was crossed. A convoy of the Saraval, who are proud and who do not forget, had been fired upon by a wind picket that mistook a survey for an incursion. 3 Saraval crew had died. The Saraval came to us, as the wronged always come to us, and we opened the ledger, and the ledger found the debt true. So the answering was called, and the fleet assembled, and I wrote the sentence. You must picture the reckoning ground to understand what came after. We do not do this work in secret. The answering is a public thing, a taught thing. Its power is the certainty it plants in every watching mind. So the assize gathered above Isk in the old formation, the ring, 400 vessels of the juridical armada arranged in a great circle 1,000 kilometers across, prows inward, all of us looking upon the empty center where the condemned would be brought to stand. Our ships are beautiful. I say this without pride, only as a fact you will need. They are long and pale and fluted, grown more than built, their hulls a single seamless casting that catches the light of whatever star we hang beneath. A Saraval ship is a blade. A toll ship of the deep conquered is a cathedral of glass. And an assize vessel is the most beautiful of all, because it must be seen. Because the whole method depends upon the watching world's understanding at a glance that these are not machines of war, but instruments of law, clean and inevitable. Below us Isk turned blue and slow, its tide flats gleaming, its people. I did not think of its people. That was not my office. My office was the ledger. The condemned party, by the ancient form, was permitted a stand-in. I should explain the stand-in because everything turns on it, and because until that morning I had thought of it perhaps twice in my life, the way you might think of a law against some crime so strange no one commits it. The form of the answering is this. The debt is set against a hull, and the hull receives the answering fire, and when the hull is gone the debt is paid. Ordinarily the hull is the guilty party's own, the ship that fired, or a vessel offered up from the guilty fleet, so that the ones who did the wrong are the ones who stand in the ark. But the old form permits another. Any party may offer a stand-in, a vessel and crew who are not the guilty, who volunteer to stand in the ark and receive the answering in the condemned's place. If the stand-in stands and receives the fire and is consumed, the debt is paid in full and the condemned goes free. No one offers a stand-in. In 400 years of records I could find only 9, and all 9 were acts of doomed love, a parent fleet dying for a colony, a captain dying for a world she had sworn to. And all 9 were consumed. That is the nature of the answering. The fire is calibrated with terrible care to leave nothing. A hull that could survive it would make a mockery of the ledger, would leave a debt half paid and a wound half open. And so the assize has always tuned the volley to the strongest hull known, and then passed it to certainty, to a margin no vessel in the recorded galaxy could cross. The stand-in clause is not mercy. It is a door that opens onto a wall. It exists in the form so that the form can say it withheld nothing, offered every path, and still the debt was paid. It is the cruelest kindness we keep, and we keep it precisely because no one can use it. The wind had no ship that could stand. Their picket boats were tide-flat craft. The answering would not so much destroy them as fail to notice them, and they had no allies. They were too small, too far, too poor in the things that buy friendship among the great. When the summons went out that a wind world had been condemned and would receive the answering, the galaxy did what the galaxy does. It looked away. This too is part of the method. The looking away is the lesson landing. So I wrote the sentence, and I expected to deliver it against a wind picket boat towed into the center of the ring, a small, ugly death that would teach a small, ugly people to mind the lines. And then, on the morning of the answering, the newcomer spoke. I had not known there were newcomers. That is a thing you should sit with. I was a reckoner of the meridian assize, and I did not know that a new people had reached the lanes. They had come quietly, as it turned out, in the way of a people who have crawled up out of a single system and are still afraid of the dark. They had made contact with the deep conquered some years before, at the far edge, and had traded a little and listened a great deal and said little, and they had not impressed anyone. The Concord's report, which I read later, described them as durable, insular, and difficult to read, and recommended no particular attention. They had no seat in any council. They held no lane. They were, in the ledger's terms, a party of no weight. And this party of no weight sent a signal to the assize, on the morning of the answering, invoking the stand-in clause on behalf of the Wend of Isk. I remember the ledger deck when the signal came. I remember the voice of the assize, she who presides, whose word opens and closes the answering, turning her long pale head toward the reader who had spoken, and I remember the particular quality of the silence, which was not shock but a kind of administrative confusion, the silence of clerks who have found a form filled out in a hand they do not recognize. A stand-in, offered by whom? By a people no one at the ring had heard of, on behalf of a people no one at the ring had cared to save. On what standing? The voice asked. It is the first question of the form. A stand-in must have standing, must be a sovereign party, must offer freely, must understand what they offer. The answer came back in our own tongue, spoken slowly, the words placed like stones. They had learned our language for this. That was the first thing that gave me pause, though I did not let it show and did not understand it then. A party of no weight had learned the tongue of the assize before they came, which is to say they had come knowing exactly what they meant to do. We are a sovereign people, the signal said. We offer freely. We understand what we offer. We will stand for the Wend of Isk. The voice asked the second question, which is the mercy the form requires us to speak aloud, so that no one may say later that we did not warn them. Do you understand, she said, that the answering is calibrated to consume the standing hull entirely, that no vessel of record has survived it, that in offering a stand-in you offer a death, and that when your hull is gone the debt is paid and your death buys nothing that can be given back to you. There was a pause. I have thought about that pause. I have decided it was not hesitation. I have decided it was courtesy, that the human speaking took a breath before answering not because they were uncertain, but because they wished the voice to feel that the question had been received and weighed as a serious question deserves. We understand, the signal said. Send the ship. And they sent the ship. Now I must tell you about the ship, because I was watching when it came into the ring, and I was the kind of watcher who had been trained his whole life to read a hull, and everything I read was wrong. It came up from the dark on the far side of Isk, a single vessel, alone, and my first thought, I confess it, because a confession is the only honest way to tell this, my first thought was that it was ugly. I do not think you can understand how ugly it seemed to me unless you understand what my eye had been raised to love. Our ships are seamless. Their beauty is the beauty of a thing with nothing added and nothing that could be taken away. And this human ship was the opposite of that in every line. It was blunt where ours are fine. It was gray, a dead flat gray with no light in it, and its hull was not a single casting but a visible assembly of plates, hundreds of them, thousands, bolted and welded and layered one over another, so that the whole surface was a map of seams. It bristled. It had no grace. It looked, to my trained and certain eye, like something a cruder people had built by hand out of whatever they had, without ever pausing to ask whether the result was fit to be seen. I remember thinking, they have sent us a foundry, a gray box of a thing, overbuilt, overplated, squat and heavy and slow, so laden with armor that it must have fought its own mass to move. Where our ships flew, this thing hauled itself. I remember the contempt, and I remember that the contempt was comfortable, because contempt is what a reckoner is permitted to feel. It confirmed the ledger. Here was a graceless people who had misunderstood the answering entirely, who had built a fortress and imagined a fortress would matter, who did not know that we do not measure walls, we erase them. The margin, the calibration, no hull of record. Their gray foundry would go the way of the nine, and the wind would learn their lesson from the ashes of strangers, and the lesson would be all the crueler for it. The ship had a name. They gave it to us plainly when we asked, as the form requires, so that it might be entered in the ledger against the debt. Forbearance. Its master answered our hail once and only once, and the master was a woman, and her voice was flat and unhurried and gave nothing away. Captain Idris Vale. I entered the name. I did not think I would need it again. You write many names in the ledger that you never think of twice. I think of that one every day. The forbearance came into the center of the ring, and it stopped. It squared itself to us, the whole ring of us, 400 pale, beautiful ships with our prows turned inward and our answering arrays already warming, and it settled into the ark as if settling into a chair. It did not maneuver. It did not seek a better angle or a lesser exposure. It presented itself fully, broadside to the greatest number of our guns, which is the position of maximum receipt, the position a hull takes when it has decided not to survive but to absorb. I had seen the nine do this in the old records. It is the posture of a thing that means to stand. And then it powered down its drives. I want you to understand what that meant to me, watching. A ship under threat holds its drives hot. It is the deepest instinct of any flying thing, the readiness to move, to run, to jink from the killing line. The forbearance banked its drives to a low idle, deliberately, visibly, so that every sensor in the ring registered the choice. It was telling us. It was telling all 400 of us and every watching world beyond, I will not move. I will not run. I am not here to survive this. I am here to receive it. Do what you have come to do. I had spent my life delivering the answering to hulls that flinched. Even the guilty flinch. Even the ones who have accepted the sentence in the last instance, the hull twitches, the drives flare, the body does what the will has forbidden. It is the most human thing about any species, I had always thought, that last involuntary flinch. And the forbearance did not flinch. It idled its engines and squared its plates and waited, gray and blunt and ugly and utterly still. And for the first time in my life, a thing standing in the ark frightened me, and I did not know why, and I told myself it was nothing, and I gave the ledger to the voice. The voice read the debt. This is the last form. She named the Wend of Isk and the crossing of the boundary and the 3 Saraval dead, and she named the debt true and unpaid, and she named the forbearance as the stand-in offered freely and understanding, and she asked the final question into the open channel, the question that is not mercy but law, the question that gives the condemned one last chance to withdraw. The stand-in may stand down, she said. The offer may be withdrawn until the fire is called. Will the forbearance stand down? The channel was quiet. Below us Isk turned. The tide flats gleamed. Somewhere in that blue water were the Wend, who could not have understood what was happening in the dark above their heads, who knew only that the sky had filled with the pale, beautiful death that meant the end of worlds, and that, for reasons no Wend could have guessed, the death had not yet fallen. The forbearance stands, Captain Idris Vale said. And the voice called the fire. I have delivered the answering many times. I know its shape from the inside, the way a smith knows the shape of the heat. It does not come all at once. That is not its nature. The answering builds. 400 arrays, ringed, converge their fire upon the single point where the standing hull waits, and the fire arrives not as a blow but as a rising, a tide of directed energy that mounts and mounts until the standing hull's own structure can no longer hold against the load. And then the structure fails, and the failure cascades, and the hull comes apart, and it is over. From first light to last is perhaps 12 seconds. The watching world see a small pale sun bloom in the dark and gutter and die, and where it was there is nothing, and the lesson has landed, and the lanes are quiet for another generation. 12 seconds. I had counted them 100 times. The fire began, and the ring lit, 400 lances of it converging inward, and the point where the forbearance stood became a brightness, and I looked away from the brightness as we are trained to, and I counted. At 3 seconds the brightness should have been total. It was not. There was a shadow in it. I did not understand the shadow. At 6 seconds the shadow should have been gone, the whole structure surrendering, the cascade beginning. The shadow held. At 9 seconds I stopped counting, because at 9 seconds the thing that had never happened in 400 years of the ledger began to happen in front of me, and my mind, which had been so certain, so comfortable in its certainty, simply stopped, the way a machine stops when it is given an input for which it has no instruction. The fire mounted to its full weight, the full converged tide of 400 arrays, the margin, the calibration, the certainty past certainty, and in the middle of it the shadow of the forbearance held its shape. It did not come apart. It shed. That is the word I have found for it in the years since, turning it over. It did not fail, it shed. Its outer plates, those hundreds of ugly bolted layers I had held in contempt, took the fire and gave themselves up to it, sheet after sheet flashing to vapor and streaming away in long white banners, so that the hull seemed to be smoking off its own skin in layers, and beneath each layer that burned away there was another, and beneath all of them, holding unmoved, was the blunt gray body of the ship. It had been built to lose itself piece by piece and remain. It had been built, I understood much later, by a people who assumed they would be hit, who did not design for the elegance of never taking a blow but for the endurance of surviving one, who had looked at the answering, for they had known what it was. They had learned our tongue and read our forms and come here knowing exactly the weight of the fire, and who had answered the question every graceful people in the galaxy had failed even to ask. Not, how do we avoid the fire? But how much fire can a wall be made to eat? The 12 seconds passed. The fire is only permitted 12 seconds, past that the arrays must vent or damage themselves, for the answering was never built to be sustained because it never needed to be. The fire guttered and died, and where there should have been nothing, there was the forbearance. It was terrible to see. I do not want you to imagine it triumphant. It was not triumphant. It was ruined and it was standing. Its skin was gone, all those hundreds of plates burned away to the last, and what stood in the dark was the naked underhull, scorched black and glowing dull red in 100 places, streaming vapor from 1,000 wounds. Half its mass boiled off into the banners of light that still hung across the ring like torn cloth. It was ugly beyond anything I had ever seen a ship become, and it had not moved. Its drive still idled low. It sat exactly where it had settled itself, squared to the ring, in the posture of receipt, having received, and it was there. It was whole in the only sense that mattered, its body unbroken beneath the burned-away skin, its crew, we could read their signatures, faint and battered and alive, its crew still at their stations. The ledger deck was silent. I have said the reckoning ground is a public thing, a taught thing, and so there were watchers beyond us, the Saraval who were owed the debt, the observers of a dozen powers, the recording eyes of the whole convened galaxy, and all of them had just seen the same thing I had seen, and none of them spoke. There was no sound anywhere in the ring but the low idle of a wounded ship that would not fall. And then Captain Idris Vale opened the channel, and she did not gloat, and she did not make a speech, and I have been grateful to her for that every day of my life since, because a speech I could have hated, and hate would have let me keep myself. She said only what the form of the answering required a stand-in to say when the fire was done, the words the nine had never lived to speak, the words that no one in 400 years had ever needed to prepare an answer for. The stand-in has stood, she said. The fire has been received. Is the debt paid? It is the question the form demands, and it has an answer, and the answer is written, and the answer is, the debt is paid when the hull is consumed. That is the law, not, the debt is paid when the stand-in dies, not, the debt is paid in blood. The debt is paid when the hull is consumed by the fire. The framers of the answering, in their certainty, in their perfect confidence that no hull could ever survive, had written the release of the debt against the receiving of the fire, and not against the death of the crew. Because to them these were the same thing, because they could not imagine a difference, because they had tuned the fire past certainty, and never once dreamed a wall could eat it and stand. The fire had been received. The whole calibrated weight of it, the full margin, the certainty past certainty, had been delivered into the forbearance, and the forbearance had taken it. The fire had been received in full. And the ship still stood. I saw the voice of the assize understand it. I was close enough to see her, and I saw the understanding move through her, and I will tell you honestly that what I saw in her was not anger and not fear but grief, the particular grief of one who has served a thing her whole life and has just watched the floor of it give way. Because there was no reading of the law by which the debt was not paid. The stand-in had stood. The fire had been received in full. The hull, which the law required to be consumed, had given up its consumable self. Every plate, every layer, the whole burnable skin it had been built to shed. And what remained was not a hull that had refused the fire but a hull that had been consumed and had survived its own consuming. The law had been satisfied to its last letter. And the crew had lived, and these two facts, which the framers had believed could never both be true, were both true, and everyone in the ring could see that they were both true. The debt was paid. The wind of Isk went free. There was no reading by which they did not. The Saraval who were owed could demand nothing further, because the answering they had been promised had been delivered in full and received in full, and the ledger closed itself. A debt cannot be collected twice. The form gave the Saraval no path to another fire. The form had never contemplated a first fire that did not end the matter. And so the most fearsome instrument in the known galaxy, the answering, the certainty on which 400 years of quiet lanes had been built, had been used at its full and terrible weight, and had left the condemned alive and the stand-in standing, and everyone watching understood in the same instant that they had just seen the thing that could not happen. I have tried in the years since to explain to younger reckoners what broke that morning, because they did not see it and they do not feel it, and the ledger they serve is a smaller and stranger thing than the one I served, and they do not know why. What broke was not a ship. Ships break. That is nothing. What broke was the certainty. The answering never had any power but certainty. 400 beautiful ships in a ring are only 400 ships. The lanes were not kept quiet by our fire. They were kept quiet by the perfect, unquestioned, marrow-deep knowledge in every flying mind that, when the assize called the fire, the standing hull died, always, without exception, without exception, without exception. That knowledge was the wall that held the galaxy. And the forbearance had walked up to that wall and stood in front of it and let us fire everything we had into it, and had shed its skin and glowed red and streamed its wounds into the dark and had not died. And every watching world had seen. The exception had been made in front of everyone in the most public and taught and certain ritual we possessed. There would be no unseeing it. There would be no putting the certainty back. From that morning on, when the assize called the fire, every mind in the galaxy would carry, in the same marrow where the old certainty had lived, the new and unkillable knowledge that a hull had once stood. We do not deliver many answerings now. I have delivered 3 in the years since Isk, and in all 3 the condemned found a stand-in, because now they know that a stand-in can stand, and the knowing has spread, and the small worlds have begun to build gray, ugly ships with layered plates, foundries, walls, the graceless, durable thing the humans showed them. And they offer these ships freely when the fire is called. And we deliver the fire, and the walls shed their skins and glow red and hold, and the debt is paid, and no one dies. This is not what I was raised to. This is not the ledger I swore to. It is, I have come to believe, a better one, and I say that without joy, the way a man admits a true thing that has cost him everything he was. I have wondered for years why the humans did it. A party of no weight, with no seat and no lane and no debt of their own to the wind, who learned our tongue and read our forms and built a wall and flew it into our ring to stand in the fire for a soft, slow people they had never met. I have wondered whether it was pity, or calculation, or some strangeness of their kind I will never parse. I put the question once through the channels to the Concord's envoy to the humans, and the answer that came back was short, and I have kept it, and I do not fully understand it, and I have stopped expecting to. They said the humans have an old word for it. They said that where the humans come from, in the cruel courts of their own long history, there was a custom, a boy kept beside a prince, who could not himself be struck, so that when the prince did wrong the blows fell on the boy instead. They said the humans remembered this the way you remember a shame. They said the humans had spent a great deal of their history being the ones who stood in the ark for the sins of the untouchable, and had decided, somewhere along the way, that if the fire was going to fall, it should fall on a wall built to take it, and not on the soft and the slow and the ones who never had a choice. I did not understand it fully, but I understood this much, and it is enough, and it is the thing I carry. We built the most beautiful ships in the galaxy so that we would never have to be hit, and they built the ugliest ship in the galaxy so that, when the fire came, they could be the ones it hit. And I had looked at their ship and felt contempt, because I had been raised to love the thing that is never touched and to despise the thing that is only built to endure. I had the whole of it backward, and I did not know it, and the not knowing was my life. The forbearance limped out of the ring under its own idling drives, streaming, glowing, half its mass burned into the banners of light that hung across the reckoning ground for hours after, so that the whole ring flew home through the drifting ash of the wall that it held. Below us the wind of Isk turned in their blue water, spared, never knowing. Captain Idris Vale did not hail us again. She had said the words the form required and no others, and her ugly wounded ship carried her and her living crew out into the dark toward whatever cruel small world had raised a people to build walls and stand in fires, and I watched it go, and I have watched it go, in my mind, every day since. I am Aharu Sen, reckoner of the meridian assize, and I write the sentences still, but I write them now in a smaller hand. I no longer believe the floor will always hold. I saw it give way once in the brightness at 9 seconds when the shadow held its shape, and a man who has seen the floor give way does not walk on it the same. The certainty is gone, and it is not coming back, and I have made my peace with being the last of a line that believed in it. The lanes are quieter than ever now, though not for the reason I was taught. They are quiet because the small worlds are no longer alone in the ark. They are quiet because somewhere out in the dark there is a people who learned our tongue and read our forms and built a wall, and who came once, when no one asked them to, and stood.